welcome to this screening at the Extreme Hangout. Thank you all for coming. I hope you don't feel too stressed and anxious, and hopefully this is time to kind of reflect on your experiences at this COP and in past COPs, and just to have a great time to exchange on your experiences. So today we're going to be screening a film, a Swiss Youth for Climate film, that we made last year at COP28 with my friend Solange, who's sitting over there. It was basically about trying to show what youth activists, youth negotiators go through at these climate conferences, and kind of what it feels like, a little perspective into what it's like to be here. After the film, we'll have a little panel discussion with Marie-Claire and Elise, and after that we'll open the floor to questions and hopefully just have a little chat about your different experiences. So I hope you enjoy the film, and yeah, bon spectacle, as they say.
My sincere gratitude to all delegations for their engagement and guidance in this process. I invite the CMA to adopt the draft decision entitled Outcome of the First Global Stocktake, contained in document FCCA/BA/CMA/2023/L.17. Hearing no objection, it is so decided.
Attends, tu t'es pas levé pourquoi?
Ça aurait pu être mieux. On voulait un texte mieux quand même. Je peux te dire qu'il n'y a pas tous les observateurs qui sont levés dans la salle, hein. C'est plutôt les négociateurs qui sont levés là. Mais bon, il faut rester positif. Et puis c'est en étant positif que les gens font du meilleur travail après.
13th of December 2023, Sultan Al Jaber, president of COP28, approves the text of the first global stocktake, with no mention of the fossil fuel phase-out so desperately needed. This is a film about the young activists working towards a livable future at the biggest international climate conference yet, the 28th Conference of the Parties in Dubai, COP28.
Assurez qu'il est plus chou que ça. C'était sympa de vous avoir connus. Emily. Tu vas voir, tu seras sur scène quand il y a les deux. Ouais.
Faire le tour du dôme. Et ensuite, on devrait... C'est à 8 minutes à pied. On n'est pas du tout dans la direction de la Green Zone. On est un peu perdu là, encore. Ah, voilà.
C'est écrit No Entrance.
Du coup, non. C'était pas facile. Ah, voilà. Entrance to Green Zone. Là, il faut qu'on aille au pavillon Extreme Hangout pour assister à un événement qui commence maintenant. On était censé marcher 8 minutes. Je tiens à te dire que ça fait officiellement 25 minutes que nous cherchons l'endroit où nous devons aller.
Hey, mais Alexis!
Putain, je croise tout le monde ce matin.
Et ça tourne, ça tourne.
Ça tourne, bien fait, ça va.
Et toi, ça va, Alexis? Tu te sens comment?
Ouais, bah ça va, écoute, un peu déprimé avec certains résultats là, enfin les statuts,
Ouais.
mais on garde la pêche.
Ça va, tu tiens?
Ouais, bah j'ai remis mes belles chaussures aujourd'hui, mais j'ai fait une pause de 5 jours parce que j'avais des cloques et des trous à faire.
Bien.
Mais c'est cool parce que bah, c'est hyper dynamique, tu vois, et tu fais tellement de choses différentes.
It's incredibly important yesterday to know that the fossil fuel industry here is brazen. We have 2,500 fossil fuel lobbyists here, 500 carbon capture storage lobbyists here. They are brazen, they are coming out in full force, and they are here because they feel threatened.
Let's take that one last question, and we might be at the end of our time, but we can also do responses outside the room.
Hi, I'm Emily from UNGO and Swiss Youth for Climate. I just have a question about your work here. I was wondering, you talked about the presence of certain lobbies, and I was wondering if you could talk to me about how you think that's affected your work at COP this year.
We're happy to talk about it. I think, ironically, this COP, and perversely, is a COP that fossil fuel interests are out and about, and there is transparency about how many are here. There's a record number of fossil fuel lobbyists here. They are emboldened, and it is brazenly so. I think, ironically, because of that, because this black box has been opened about how corrupt these talks actually are, it forces politicians to come to the table and they have to make a choice. Are they standing with the fossil fuel lobbyists who have it completely uncovered, or are they standing with the people on the planet? And we hope that they choose the latter. Thank you.
So the trends to look out for, the big trend is we need to get this fossil fuel phase out commitment, and we need to get this language. It's the first step to many other things. There's going to be a ton of actions going on. A youth action yesterday on fossil fuels was out in full force. I think everybody just has to show the people power flooding the halls here, that governments can't hide anymore, and putting your body out there, protesting, talking to your governments, just getting them all the time. Will you phase out? Will you phase out? And that type of pressure. Like the beauties of the COP is that it's a pressure cooker. So for the rest of the year, they don't get this type of concentrated pressure on them. The youth need to come up, frontline communities need to come up, and other low-lying states need to come up. All of us need to come together as a global force on certain politicians to get them to move. And that's how we're going to get phase out fossil fuels.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. And I think it's so important for youth to know that you should refuse to be gaslit, right? Everybody will tell you, you don't know how it works. Why are you asking for fossil fuel phase out? You have every right to demand what is absolutely clear in science. And so you guys should just go for it and speak with moral clarity because you have it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Juste plus qu'elle aille plus vite quoi. Cheeseburger vegan. Moi j'ai faim tout le temps ici. J'ai tout le temps faim. C'est un micro? Ouais. Waouh, t'es tellement pro. Bah, c'est fou parce que t'es un peu brainwash. Je passais dans ce truc pendant 2 semaines. Et puis elle m'a dit, c'est pas contre toi, hein, mais elle a dit, il faudrait que tu reframes un peu le narratif et tout. Puis elle me disait, bah, tu devrais dire que la nourriture c'est extrêmement important pour la jeunesse parce que la jeunesse c'est le futur. Puis j'étais là, mais Saskia, pour moi tout ça c'est des discours ultra plats. Enfin c'est. Puis elle a rigolé, puis elle me fait, bah ouais, bah, c'est ça en fait. Et puis j'ai dit, bah en fait, je suis en train de comprendre ce que c'est la diplomatie. Quand t'es invité sur un panel discussion, tu peux pas dire ce que tu veux. T'arrives à un endroit où le monde entier te regarde, et vraiment c'est en mode. En fait, je dois faire gaffe aux conflits d'intérêts, tu vois. Ouais. Et j'avais pas réellement réalisé ça.
T'avais dit que tu te sentais un peu déprimé. Je te vole une frite.
Ah bien sûr, vas-y. Je me sens déprimé, pas parce que je suis le jeune délégué, je suis le délégué de la jeunesse pour le climat. Hein. Ça m'est arrivé déjà l'année passée à la COP. Ouais. Et il y a une année, et il y a 2 ans aussi en fait. C'est juste que même si tu te dis de ne pas avoir des attentes trop hautes, quand tu arrives ici, évidemment, tu as des attentes. Surtout en tant que jeune idéaliste militant, bah, tu as envie d'y croire, tu vois. Et je me disais qu'en étant négociateur, j'aurais peut-être un impact un peu plus, tu vois. Et ça a duré 3 heures, tu vois, de 19h à 22h, c'était intense. Donc il y a 25% du programme qui est passé à l'eau, juste pour des discussions procédurales. Et quand j'ai réalisé tout ça, tu vois, parce que tu comprends un peu mieux quand tu es dans la délégation, tu étais là, putain, en fait, on a perdu une année littéralement. Et en tant que jeune militant ou défenseur du climat, tu sais à quel point chaque année compte. Et là, j'ai eu le sentiment d'être abusé en termes de langage. Donc j'avais eu le sentiment d'être abusé. J'ai été déçu par la manière dont les négociations s'étaient passées. Et en plus, j'avais une montée d'éco-anxiété. Enfin, j'étais là, putain, on vient de perdre une année. Et en plus de ça, ils sont comme ça à justifier pourquoi ils n'ont pas réussi, tu vois. Et là, c'était too much. J'ai pleuré, en fait. J'ai pleuré dans la salle des négociations. Et heureusement, j'avais des mouchoirs, parce que c'était lame, tu vois. Il y avait les négociateurs et tout, et j'étais derrière. Heureusement, j'étais pas sur la table. J'étais derrière les négociateurs de Géorgie, de Suisse et du Mexique. Et c'était rude. Et à la fin de la négociation, j'ai dû partir. Et pendant 10 minutes, j'étais assis tout seul dans un coin. Et j'essayais de me reprendre, quoi. C'était chaud. J'ai eu une montée d'angoisse, quoi. D'angoisse climatique. Et je crois qu'il fallait juste que je sois tout seul et que j'accepte que, d'un côté, il ne faut pas attendre autant de la COP, et d'un autre, on est vraiment dans la merde, quoi. Et au final, il faut un petit peu prendre du recul. Quand ça fait une semaine que tu dors 4 heures, que tu as travaillé tous les jours avec tes potes, que tous les jours tu as rencontré les négociateurs pour transmettre ce que tu voulais, que tu as passé des heures durant à essayer de comprendre ce que ça voulait dire ces négociations, puis qu'au final, il n'y a rien qui sort de tout ça, et qu'en plus, tu as le sentiment d'être abusé, à un moment, ça pète, quoi. Mais après, une demi-heure après, ça allait un peu mieux. J'ai eu de la peine à m'endormir le soir. J'étais un peu down toute la soirée.
Et est-ce que tu as toujours espoir en quelque chose enfin, tu y crois à la COP ou tu y crois au changement? Tu te sens comment par rapport au futur, en fait?
Oui. J'ai espoir. Parce qu'on n'a pas le temps de ne pas avoir d'espoir et d'être pessimiste. C'est pas une stratégie qui va marcher, tu vois. Donc, faut rester pragmatique. C'est juste que là, je me suis fait dépasser par les émotions. Et j'ai espoir, il faut que les gens comprennent, et ça c'est le signal que la COP est là pour envoyer un signal au monde, pour dire voilà, le monde s'accorde là-dessus, du coup on va le faire. On n'arrive pas à envoyer ce signal, c'est ça qui est dommage. En fait, c'est le narratif qui pêche ici, tu vois. C'est la collaboration. En termes d'implémentation, je pense pas qu'en fait il faut penser que ce soit la COP qui va nous sauver, loin de là. Mais c'est ça qu'il faut que les gens comprennent. La COP est là de manière plus symbolique que pragmatique, en fait. Et donc oui, il me reste de l'espoir parce que c'est pas les résultats de la COP qui va définir si la Suisse va changer sa politique climatique, tu vois. Puis de toute façon, on respecte pas les accords. Donc oui, j'ai encore de l'espoir, mais il faut comprendre que si on veut réussir, il va falloir avoir une transition systémique et inclusive. Donc systémique à tous les niveaux, gouvernement, entreprises et citoyens, et inclusive, ça veut dire tous les acteurs, tous les pays du monde et tous les groupes différents de tous les pays, autant marginalisés qu'ils soient ou pas. Donc le plus gros défi de l'humanité, quoi. Plus ou moins. Alors là, on va aller du coup dans la salle. Attends, il faut que je retrouve mon programme.
C'est bien d'être avec toi, tu te repères un peu mieux.
Ouais, alors meeting room
L'expérience.
3. Ça aide après 10 jours, hein. Juste plus de pieds. Et donc maintenant, l'enjeu, c'est d'avoir un texte sur lequel tout le monde peut être satisfait et qui atteint le consensus. Et c'est du wording, c'est ultra fin, tu vois, dans les textes et tout. C'est pour ça que des fois, si t'as un œil externe, la première fois, t'as l'impression que c'est des aliens qui parlent, quoi, et t'es là. Mais c'est quoi l'importance, la différence de ce terme si on sait que dehors, il y a des feux, il y a des inondations, il y a des problèmes beaucoup plus graves que la différence entre encourager et décider, tu vois. Mais en vrai, tous ces termes, ça fait une cascade de processus administratifs dans les pays. Et un seul terme peut changer la face entière d'un secteur, d'une industrie ou d'un pays, tu vois. Donc c'est assez dingue. Putain, les petits boutons là et tout.
Verdict?
Verdict, ça va pas trop avancer, quoi. Quand elle arrive à la fin des négociations, t'as plusieurs sorties outcomes possibles, et il y en a une, c'est soit on arrive à trouver un consensus, tout le monde est content et puis on a un texte, qui n'est pas du tout le cas ici. Soit on met une décision procédurale, c'est-à-dire qu'on garde le texte tel quel et puis on reporte. Soit il y a Rule 16 qui s'applique, et la Rule 16, la règle 16, c'est que on efface tout. Et on sait que c'est pas l'objectif du président de la COP Al-Jaber, parce qu'il est très ambitieux et il veut beaucoup de décisions. Ouais. Du coup, c'est la technique en fait de tous les pays progressifs. Ils savent que Al-Jaber, il va pas appliquer la règle 16. Ouais. Donc c'est pour ça qu'au début, tous les pays progressifs ont directement pris le mot Et ils ont balancé un max de trucs sur la table avec toutes les idées qu'ils avaient sur les énergies renouvelables, les émissions à basse quantité de carbone, etc. Pour qu'en fait maintenant, Al-Jaber, il reprenne ça. Et puis il discute avec les ministres, puis il dit voilà ce qu'on a reçu. Mais à la fin, vous avez bien vu, la Chine, l'Arabie Saoudite et l'Inde, ils ont démonté les pays progressifs, elles ont même démonté la science, quoi. C'est du déni scientifique, quoi, en gros, ce qui se passe ici. Voilà, quoi. Mais bon, ça fait partie de ça, quoi. Il faut écouter les voix de chacun et chacune, mais ça fait mal au cul de se dire que la science est encore bafouée, quoi.
Il y a une règle qui n'a jamais été adoptée dans les procédures des règles de la COP, qui est la règle 42, qui dit qu'en fait on pourrait basculer à un système de super majorité. Et je pense qu'au vu de l'inaction climatique actuelle des gouvernements et aussi de l'urgence climatique, ça pourrait aider.
Merci beaucoup en tout cas d'avoir été avec nous en direct de Dubaï, Alexis Belliman. Vous avez suivi cette COP au sein de la délégation officielle suisse. Très bonne journée à vous, merci.
Très bien.
Une révolution.
Ça va, c'était pas mal les questions. Heureusement, je me suis préparé, parce que sinon j'ai essayé d'être le plus constructif possible, mais pas non plus, tu vois, genre en mode politicien, en mode tu dis que des choses plates, tu vois. J'ai pas envie juste de tourner autour du pot et puis de donner aucun message.
Et puis toi, qu'est-ce qui t'a motivé à devenir actif un peu dans ce... Genre, t'es sorti d'où un peu? Ouais,
c'est l'argent.
Non.
Je rigole. Oh, ça, tu peux commencer.
Non, je le laisse, ça. À part l'argent.
Non, en fait, ma motivation pour m'impliquer dans l'activisme du climat, c'était vraiment de me dire, nous, notre génération, on est la seule génération qui est la première à devoir tout changer et aussi la dernière qui peut tout changer. Et je pense que c'est pas trop grand pour nous, tu vois. Et je pense que seuls les jeunes sont assez fous et ambitieux pour pouvoir le faire.
Et puis aussi, par rapport à qui occupe l'espace, comment est-ce que ce poids des délégations, elle influence un petit peu ton activisme, par exemple, à toi?
Exactement. Et en fait, en termes de COP, on est vraiment passé d'une des COP qui était beaucoup plus petite, en fait, où il y avait certainement quelques ONG, associations, qui pouvaient facilement trouver leur délégation et trouver leur ministre. Et donc, l'influence était beaucoup plus directe, parce que c'était beaucoup plus petit, en fait. Et je me demande vraiment si c'est pas un choix délibéré de ceux qui organisent, en fait, de créer des trucs immenses pour un peu noyer le poisson.
It's too big. This venue is way too big, and there's a big circus happening in the pavilions that I think is distracting all of us from what is actually being discussed in these rooms. And in general, this whole system is made to be very inaccessible. Everything is in English, which I think is the biggest problem. You can get interpretation, but all the texts are in English. Like, it's really hard. Like, even knowing where to find the texts, knowing where to find the agenda, and then walking around here. It's not very easy to understand. Yeah.
Of course, I mean, civil society needs to be very well trained to be actually able to influence the process, right? Then they're dropped into a space which is not made for humans. I mean, this space is completely overwhelming. It's very intimidating, not only for young people, but very often for young people specifically, especially also for young females. And it's very, very hard to actually make sense of all of this.
Well, the most meaningful youth engagement is actually youth delegates in the room. And I'm very pleased that the youth delegates this year at this COP are considerably more than last time. And the elders are very supportive. We've met them before the COP, we've met them at the COP. And I find that they have a new way of operating, which is really significant. They collaborate with each other. They share experience. They tell each other what's happening in the different rooms. And they're not just bound by their own country's interest. Of course, I'm sure they want to protect their country's interest, but more than that, they want a collective decision that will work for the whole world.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, that was great.
Okay. And thank you for respecting that it was quick.
Yeah. I've just checked the time and it's
5 minutes 40, so I tried to do good timekeeping for you.
That's the Swiss precision.
That's the Swiss precision, yeah.
But also, I appreciated the fact you came, you found us, you were not rude, you were polite when you stopped us at the gate, even though we were in a hurry. You were doing good things. And I think sometimes we need to be bold, especially if you're younger, and if I'm being honest, especially if you're a woman, in those spaces. So, you know, that's one of the reasons we wanted to give you a bit of time.
That's so kind, thank you so much. You should have seen us debating, do we go, do we not go, do we go?
It was the right move, because you did it well. You did it politely and respectfully.
Well, thank you very much, that means a lot, thank you.
Hi, can I get some? Great.
Are you good at doing
Okay,
this?
but be careful, there are always two on.
Antonio, what are they? Can you tell me what they are?
Yes, so here is the demands from the youth for the final days. We have the last final days coming up, so we have the GST propositions from Youngo and then some general demands. Okay. And we're trying to hand them to the ministers for some information about what's the youth perspective and what's going on.
Cool.
So let's see if we can get that done.
We're from Youngo. Maybe you'd like this. Okay. Ouch.
You're not allowed to give it to them, but if they take it, if you're here, this is Youngo, and then they take it, I think then it should be allowed from the process.
Yeah, sure.
Did you ask authorization for this to the NGO?
No, we didn't. We didn't know we needed to.
Every handout is supposed to be authorized by UNFCCC.
Oh, right, okay. We were not aware of this.
So now someone is coming here just to check this with you guys, okay?
Okay, yeah, sure.
If it's okay or not.
Of course.
Until then, we'd like to ask you to...
Okay, yeah. There are quite a lot of us. So how do we do that? We just... Right. Oh, fantastic. Maybe you could do it for us. We don't want to get in trouble. I mean, or you could take it for us. Sure. Thank you.
And also Youngo did an amazing campaign with Provec about food at COP. And thanks to this campaign that we worked on since last April, we were able to ask for 2/3 of the food at COP being plant-based and locally sourced and vegetarian. So this is historic. For the very first time, 2/3 of the food at COP is actually sustainable, and I think that's the message we have to send to the world. And this proves that by working together, we can achieve great things.
C'est cool, vous aviez l'air tout heureux et tout.
C'est bien, c'est rare que tu as l'occasion d'amener les jeunes sur scène. En plus avec tout plein de jeunes, ça fait cet effet un peu de momentum et puis de réunion, donc je trouve que c'était bien.
Please come, we're gonna change the world, you know?
Sometimes I feel like we're invited just to speak as a young member instead of just an actual expert in the fields that we work in. And I'd like to see us being invited to the table because we actually do have solutions.
That if we want to solve this problem, we need to have a dialogue, and they need to listen to us, we need to listen to them, but they have to do their homework, and we're here to hold them accountable.
I think I came with more hope. I'm living with less hope on the process, but I am taking more hope of the people. The people are concerned, the people are doing things, like our governments sometimes do not represent our interests, but people know it and people are moving and we are talking to each other. Like the nationalities are erased when it comes to climate change.
I'm just learning to have patience with the system. It's not like I had given up, but to really understand how it's going. I think it's part of the process is to be discouraged and feeling discouraged about the whole process, but I think it's a good sign because at least I know where are the problems lie and where I can solve it however I want it, like even if it's such a small contribution.
Now the question is, where do we go from here? You know, we participate in the panels, we have a conversation that's engaging, but what is the follow-up like? How does that translate into actual policy? And that always remains to be seen, I think, especially now as we wait for the final text and see what actually made it to the end.
Bonsoir. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui ce soir. J'aimerais demander qu'on fasse un fossil fuel phase-out au nom de la jeunesse et une inclusion de la jeunesse représentative et investie auprès des négociations du climat l'année prochaine à la COP29 en Azerbaïdjan. Je ferai un mic drop, mais ce mic n'est pas droppable.
What are your thoughts on youth activism?
Il est 20h23 et de base il était censé sortir à 17h, après c'était 18h, après c'était 19h et depuis 19h il n'y a pas de nouvelles et selon ce que j'ai entendu, il y en a qui disent que ce sera 10h30, d'autres que c'est minuit.
É atingir acordo global entre aquelas economias dependentes da indústria fóssil e os países desenvolvidos.
On voit la toute fin de la COP où là, juste à côté, il y a une action encore pour dire qu'on veut de fossil fuel phase out. Et juste là-bas, il va y avoir la plénaire finale où le président de la COP, M. Al-Jaber, va présenter le texte final. La question, c'est est-ce que ce sera la dernière plénaire ou pas? Est-ce que tout le monde va accepter ce nouveau texte? Il est décevant aux yeux de beaucoup de gens, à mes yeux en tout cas, il est décevant aux yeux de la délégation suisse, aux yeux de beaucoup de pays, parce qu'il n'y a pas le terme qu'on veut tous, fossil fuel phase out. Le terme inclusif a été mis dans l'engagement de la jeunesse, pour définir l'engagement de la jeunesse. Il doit être inclusif. Donc ça, c'est une grande victoire pour, un petit pas, mais une grande victoire pour Laurence et moi, parce que c'est nous qui avons dit de mettre ça dans le texte. Et apparemment, s'il est accepté, ça va être un mot qui sera dans la décision de cette COP, qui vient de Laurence et moi. Donc c'est assez ouf. Mais voilà, c'est une toute petite victoire par rapport au nombre de défaites qu'on voit ici. Moi, où je suis ambitieux, je pense que c'est la COP30 qui se passera au Brésil, sous la présidence de Lula, qui est un président extrêmement ambitieux, progressif, et qui aura lieu en pleine Amazonie. Donc ce sera peut-être le moment où les consciences vont se réveiller. Avec plaisir.
And I want to thank especially the young people that were present at this COP, the activists, the indigenous people, the more than 90,000 people that mobilized from all around the world, the representatives of all different faiths that came here looking for an answer.
Life of a nation facing the worst climate disaster of the century. Climate justice now!
Journalists have been killed, our stories via genocide and Gaza.
You care more about profit than about our future. Shame.
How are we supposed to achieve climate justice if there's actually no additional finance? And sacrifice communities up and down the Louisiana. Just transition is based on human rights. It's based on labor rights. Do you even care? Do you even care?
Au
although COP28 did not lead to the fossil fuel phase-out we needed, it demonstrated to me the power, ambition and determination of youth activists around the world. But this is not enough, and we want more. We are the youth of today speaking for the youth of tomorrow. Youth activists might sit in negotiation rooms, but it's about time we be handed the microphones.
Please sit down, that's cringe. Yes, so thank you. I hope you enjoyed the film. I'd love to welcome Marie-Claire Graff and Elise Buckler on the stage with me, and we'll get you some chairs. We can stand? We can stand? Yeah, we can stand. Yeah, we can stand. Cool. Finally, a bit of standing. So I guess my first question to you both is, you're both very experienced in terms of COPs. No, not yet. Well, maybe let me ask my first question to Elise. Okay, so whilst Marie-Claire gets mic'd up, Elise, you're super experienced in terms of COPs, etc. I know that you're kind of fresh out of the first viewing of the film, but how has the experience you saw of COPs in the film reflected with your experience of past COPs? And could you tell us a little bit about how you feel about it?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Emily. First, I want to say I was really touched by your film. I mean, it really brought like tears to my eyes, and I could see myself in this film being like 25-year-old going to my first COP in Montreal in 2005. That was almost 20 years ago. I was 20 years younger. I'm now almost 45. I have 2 kids who are 14 and 11. And it's true that the first COP, you come into that space, your expectations are so high, and very soon you realize the system is so complex. And also it's very hard because you don't feel you have the legitimacy, or people bring you in because you are a youth and it looks great on the panel, not for your expertise. And I just think you've done really an amazing job, and I really hope we can share that film and amplify it, take it also to Albert Rushdie and other people like that so they can see it. But yeah, that's just my first reaction. It really touched my heart, and for me the key takeaway of this COP is I want to do more for youth, really. And I think we need to build bridges of intergenerational solidarity a lot more, and so thank you for starting a new passion for me in terms of this intergenerational solidarity.
Thank you. What about you? How do you feel about, I know that, I mean, you were in the film and I remember interviewing you and you had so many cool insights, but how do you feel about maybe your experience this COP, previous COPs, and
Yeah, it's also beautiful to see some of the young negotiators we actually train, because I think that's my biggest pride. I don't know, many of you might already know, so I've been a young negotiator with the government of Switzerland back in 2019. Out of this, we created a youth position within the Swiss delegation, which I think is great, and we can definitely advance it. But I think what is even more exciting, how we kind of created a movement of young negotiators, and as also in the movie said, who are really sitting at these tables, having the microphones, having the mandate, but also are being trained. So we give them a quite rigorous training over 6 months, because as you all know, being here at the COP, it can be quite overwhelming. We also heard it in the movie, it can be quite complex. And to really bring about change, I think we have to understand how the system works, so we can actually also change the system, right? I think like having a seat, also like being able to change how we're actually sitting at these tables, changing what is being discussed, changing the tables, I think is what is our task here. And I think this came through very beautifully in the movie, kind of the mix of activism, the mix of how observers come, but also the negotiators. And I think that's how it works, right? We all have a distinct specific role, but we have to understand how we're playing our roles the best and how we can contribute to the overarching change. What I also think is very beautiful in the movie is kind of this emotional roller coaster, which I think most people completely underestimate, right? How much of a toll it actually takes on you if the text is not moving forward. Staying up late, being here until the morning, talking to at least 500 people a day, all the time, right? I mean, that's, I think the movie gives a very good inside perspective, but it breaks it down without kind of all the jargons that it kind of like overwhelmingly complex. So kudos to all of you.
Yeah, definitely a team effort. And I was thinking how, because you obviously, again, as I say, been in the system for quite a while as a youth negotiator, as a younger person trying to influence the process, how have you seen kind of youth engagement at COPs evolve, and how are young people kind of evolving to manage the system better?
You want to start off? Because you came earlier than me.
I came earlier, yes. Yes, I think that also thanks to like the work you do, Marie-Claire, I think the way youth negotiator engage is much more professional, like they're much better equipped, you know, they know all the language, the acronyms, and so they're being taken much more seriously on the inside of the negotiations room, which is really great. At the same time, we're just discussing before the start, I also see a lot of fragmentation, but not just the youth movement, the climate movement in general, because you have the people on the inside and the people on the outside. And now you see also because of the influence of the fossil fuel industry, there are people on the outside that just want to put the COP to trash. And I'm actually one of these people who still believe in climate diplomacy, because we don't have a plan B. I mean, the same way we don't have a planet B, we don't have a UN B. And yes, it's not perfect, but we still need all these countries to cooperate. And it is complex. And what I found interesting in what Mary Robinson was saying, and I had the same impression, what I love about this experience now with Swiss Youth for Climate, what I see is you have this solidarity that is so strong, and you have a new way of working, because I think the youth leaders today have this unique capacity to think about all of us as one humanity on one earth, and think beyond the national boundaries, beyond the north-south boundaries, beyond the gender divides. And it's really about building a bridge and being all of us as one team on one planet. And that's also our DNA as climate bridges on radical collaboration. And I found it really beautiful, the solidarity there is now inside the Swiss Youth delegation. And so I hope that you can be an inspiration, and I think maybe now the older negotiators need to learn from you how to do things differently, and because systems change is complex, and we need to be able to go beyond these institutional boundaries and really to go beyond the egos and the logos, and that's the hard part. Mm-hmm. So thank you for teaching us that as well.
Well, I'm not sure I could take that credit, but what about you? What do you think about?
Yeah, it's always inspiring to talk to people who have been fighting for the space before, because I mean, the abilities we have to engage in the system now, we have thanks to people who have been fighting before us. It's always inspiring. There is someone else called Marie-Claire in the space. She's a professor now in Cambridge, and she's been at the she has been at the Rio Earth Summit, and she has been there delivering a statement on behalf of youth when she was actually young, on the engagement of young people. And it's just kind of like crazy to see it's a lifetime of her on the youth engagement. So we definitely have come a long way. Also, like it was mentioned of the youth constituency, Youngo, we just celebrated 15 years anniversary 2 days ago of Youngo. Other youth constituencies also in other processes which came about. So I mean, the formalization of the voice of young people, kind of also this, how young people, how Youngo in this case also has been evolving from kind of like a couple of few people to actually a huge movement, but also how we have been able to break out of the UNFCCC only, knowing that it's like one UN. There are many other kind of areas of the UN which also engage in this, and I think like there we have been able to kind of really penetrate the system in a way that actually also can lead to a systems change. We also, with the Academy and other programs, have been able to kind of bridge the divide from young people are only outside observers, kind of like, as also in the movie, like, oh, no, you cannot stand here, you cannot engage here, right? Kind of really going in there, that basically kind of taking over all the different spaces, so we can actually, as you also rightfully mentioned, build these bridges just by being inherently interlinked. If you have Swiss Youth for Climate members like myself, or also Alexis, or also Anna now, who are in the Swiss delegation, but also here, but also connected to other delegations, we are basically the network already. And there are so many other networks, and Swiss Youth for Climate is also a member of Youngo and has been substantially contributing. I've been the focal point as well for Youngo for 2 years. So I mean, basically how we ourselves are being a part of the system which can lead to this interconnection. And I think that's the most beautiful part also for me, to be at these COPs, because it basically showcases how these interlinkages work. And there we definitely need to do even more. And I think the COP is already like, with the size it now has, I think we're very well connected. I think we need to do more work before, so once we come here, we even are better prepared, and people already know the positions and statements of young people, so ideally the countries already include them when they're coming here, and we're not just kind of trying to hammer it in there, because that's normally, it's just a lot of resistance because everyone is just so overwhelmed. And I think the more we can shift in the preparation and in the aftermath of the COP process, the stronger our voices get by being included in the different processes already.
And so you're both doing kind of work on making the process more inclusive for different groups, whether it be young people, women, people from the Global South. In like an ideal world, an ideal COP, which is hard to imagine, what kind of, I mean, we know we talk about inclusivity, but what does that actually like practically look like? Like what kind of measures would you imagine would lead to a perfect COP?
You want to start as well?
Okay, well, first thing, also as a woman, I must say, you know, my dream for Brazil would be to have a woman as a COP president. And we've been really campaigning for that for a long time. Why? Because obviously there's the youth issue, but there's also the gender issue, and you talk about it in your film. Since COP1 in 1995, when Angela Merkel was COP president, we only had 5 women as COP president in 30 years. And there's this huge divide, you know, the people who are heads of delegations, 20% are men. So there's still a very big gender gap that we have to address. And so there's the top, and it's also systemic, but I think this is the visible part of the iceberg, and I think that would be very important next year for the COP presidency in Brazil to really walk the talk on gender, on youth. So it would be great to see a COP30 presidency team representing people, you know, with 50% of women, with 50% of youth. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but really representing the people of the world. And obviously the other barrier is people of color. So if you are young, if you are a woman, if you are a person of color, everything is harder. So how do we make sure that the people who represent us at COP, who have a seat at the table, who are negotiating, represent actually the people of the world? And we have the same issue in politics. I mean, look at Switzerland. You see people who are sitting at the parliament. It's mainly men over 60-year-old white, and so there are always minorities who are underrepresented. So I think inclusion and diversity is very important, giving everybody a voice, an equal voice. That would be one dream. And then we need to keep pushing for what we have achieved on fossil fuels. So I know in your film you say there was no phase out of fossil fuels, but I want to say we were really, really happy of the decision of COP28 to transition away from fossil fuels. And of course it was a compromise and we had to fight really hard for it. But I must say this was the first time in history that the words fossil fuels were included in a COP decision. And what is good about the youth leaders is you always push for higher ambition. And it's also because youth were pushing for phase out that we had the language transition away from fossil fuels. Now I'm really worried is now at COP29, I'm not sure we're going to keep that. We may be like going backwards. So we have to hold the line on what we have achieved last year. And we need to fight for climate finance. I mean, we have, 24 hours left or 48 hours left, and this is the COP of finance. If we don't have an agreement on climate finance in Baku, there's no way we can have a good outcome next year in Brazil. So I think this is my message to you. I don't know if you have contacts to delegations, even on WhatsApp, but please push for one agreement on climate finance. Now we have a proposal from the Global South, a proposal from the Global North, and we have to bridge them into one proposal on climate finance. So COP is not over, right? So please, let's keep pushing for it and let's stand up for climate finance here right now.
What about you, perfect COP?
Well, I actually think in my perfect world, I mean, we don't actually need a COP anymore because we have solved the issue. I mean, the COP is basically here to solve a problem, right?
Very
and
true.
I think like many of these conferences have been actually, conventions have been set up to solve an issue, and ideally we resolve it so we don't have to come here, we can actually do other things on the ground ideally, really work on the implementation, so we no longer have to talk about like, you know, kind of meta-level policies which are guiding us in all the tensions. I mean, when we talk about the dream, I think we can meet in different modalities than here. But in the meantime, I think what is really crucial is kind of like two elements, right? I mean, one is that there is equal representation here, but what we also see that even if there's, for example, like an increase in female negotiators, when they were actually tracking the speaking time, there was like a huge gap, right? So sometimes also we have more diverse people in the rooms, but then it's still the same people talking, right? So you get just like a female note taker, maybe like another young person who can bring you the coffee, but that it looks good in the room, but actually it's not who is speaking or not who is listened to. And I think that's a bigger long-term process. Because also like, of course, we tend to listen maybe like more closely to someone who we already know. That's why it's so crucial to, when we are also bringing in young people also to the academy, that we are very, very kind of like, focused, that we also bring in representation. We bring in, for example, we put the focus on bringing young females, indigenous young people, but also young people with disabilities and special abilities, right? Because when we cannot just fight for, okay, we just have to bring more young people in, and with this perpetuate the inequalities we already see in the system. And we know it's incredibly hard because the system is built on exclusion already. For example, the language topic which has been mentioned. For example, when we are training negotiators, and we would bring someone here who doesn't speak English, they are not able to actually engage in the system. So there are certain inequalities which are built in the system, which it's very hard for us to fight. Others are easier. For example, bring in young people from indigenous backgrounds. We can do this, and we have to do this. It's our responsibility as collective, like we as young people, to fight for this, and also ensure that they actually get, so for example, lead negotiating roles, they're getting coordination roles within their groupings, they're able to speak at the G77 meetings, because that's how they also build their profile for us as a collective. Because if they're, again, just there and sitting in the second or third row, they're not going to speak, right? It's a nice decoration, it looks good on the statistics. And I'm sometimes a little bit worried that it's kind of just on the front, okay, we have someone, like who's kind of female, but doesn't actually represent the views of, for example, young people or indigenous peoples. And I think we have to work on both. Representation in the room, then prepare them, get them into these strategic positions, connect them, support them throughout the year. Because also when we see people who go far, they can also be just cut off, right? And we have been seeing this over and over in the negotiations, that there were especially females who have been going out of their way, making things happen, and then they have been facing harassment cases, even up to sexual harassment cases. That's also why you see on the screens now all the code of conduct and how to behave. This came from an outburst of women who have been saying how they have been treated when they have been, for example, being co-chairs in rooms. And I think that's where we have to kind of like support each other as a network as well. And that's part of systems change. It's never hard to kind of overthrow the current power struggles. And I mean, the COPs is basically the epitome of power struggles. You have like the whole power struggles of the world, kind of bringing them in one venue and let them kind of negotiate or fight with each other. So I mean, changing this has a huge ripple effect globally, and I think that's what we are up to ultimately, which is not an easy task, but I think we and many others have been doing this for many, many decades and are continuing doing this.
Thank you very much. Super interesting points. I don't know if anyone has any questions or wants to react, or we have a question in the front row already.
I have a question actually more maybe for you, Marie-Claire. So you've been working for years now with Climatics delegates, and of course there is a very big part on capacity building on the technical side, so to be able to understand the negotiations and influence them. But I was also wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the more emotional part. So first, you've been dealing also with a lot of young people at COP. What's maybe the main feelings coming? Is there like any type of trends, and also do you have any coping mechanism that you advise to the young people, or like some strategy to also be more resilient in the space as youth?
Great question. And when we set up the academy, so the Youth Negotiators Academy, I said that when I'm putting the training, because I've been leading on the trainings now for 3 years, there is an element on mental health, on self-care practices. So we are training our young negotiators, and we kind of put them in these scenarios where you're going to be under stress, you haven't slept, you haven't eaten yet, you deliver something. How do you take care of yourself? How do you take care of the group? And how do we take care of the collective we are? And also how we can then basically also ripple change into the bigger system, which is like under a lot of pressure and a lot of like forced situations which do not feel natural, like in these rooms. So it's part of the training, so we kind of train them in advance before they come here. We also have a mental health expert and trauma therapist with us who is here for 3 weeks. She is always sitting outside of the meeting room 24 if you want to meet her. And she gives free counseling and support to the young negotiators that can come there anytime between 9 in the morning and 7 in the evening. We are providing every day between 6 and 7 a debrief of the day where it's a lot about technicalities but also about emotional kind of stressful situations or things are coming up. We are providing also, for example, just kind of food. You can always come there and get some food, right? It's kind of like this moment where people can meet. It's kind of like the well or kind of like a place where people are gathering. And this itself already, what we hear from the negotiators very often provides so much support for them. So they have for example, there's some Swiss chocolate there and they're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I have had today. You know, a quick hug from someone, a quick conversation, and a little bit of chocolate, and they feel so much better. It's like these tiny things, or like a hug in the room or on the go. On the other hand, also again, we have a specialist here because some of the things are deeper. Some of the things coming up as intergenerational trauma, maybe through an encounter, which also needs specific support. I have been making, when I was focal point for Young, a request to the Secretariat to next to their first aid, actually also have mental health first aid. Unfortunately, still not implemented, as you might have seen. There is no one on the venue if you have any mental health related issues where you can go to, which I don't think is a good precedent, especially when you have tens of thousands of people here. But I think we as a collective can also really strengthen each other and have self-care practices. So we always send them in the morning, a self-care practice and a field reading, and we send them something in the evening as well to a reminder of taking care of themselves. So it's kind of like these tiny things we do next to the training as well.
I think that's a really, really important point because I've also seen a lot of people going through burnout and depression, and there's eco-anxiety, and something I think that we also, where we have to walk the talk, is how we make space for more regenerative leadership. And so something we have actually tried here at COP is to have a circle of trust. So to build a space that feels safe, especially for women, actually to help each other, to also do mindfulness, and that's something really where we have to connect the inner transformation and the outer transformation. And on that, I must say one of my mentors is Christiana Figueres. I don't know if you know her story, but she had a very difficult time in her life before the Paris Agreement, and she started doing mindfulness, going to the Plum Village in France, which is a very big mindfulness center, and now she has built a huge community connecting mindfulness and climate, and with now there's more like 1,000 people like us who are climate negotiators or climate leaders who also try to include mindfulness, yoga, and healthy practice like sleeping well, eating well. It sounds very basic, but we have to bring that into COP a lot more, the well-being. We can't save the planet if we don't take care of ourselves. We are part of the earth, we're not separate. So taking care of the earth starts by taking care of ourselves. And I think it's beautiful what you do also, providing that support, including that in your program. It's really, really, really important.
Yeah,
so,
it is.
Yeah.
I think we had a question. Yes?
Thank you. So this question is to the both of you, that you started coming to COP when you were both very young. And so this is my first COP. And I wanted to ask, what has kept you going for so long? And, what also keeps you going till today and even beyond?
Yeah, well, if you want to listen to the 10 for 10 in the Swiss TV, I gave an answer yesterday night. So I think, as you rightfully mentioned, it's a global problem. We have to have a global solution, especially when you put justice at the heart of it. Because, you can have bilateral conversation, but then you leave out all the countries who are currently suffering the most. So you have bilateral are kind of perpetuating the inequalities and the injustices as well. So having a global space with a process where everyone has kind of one country, one vote is a very strong stance on the justice element. So if you put justice for countries, not per se for the people, but for the countries in place, then the UN process is actually, a very good place to do so. Also, if we do not have this space, again, there's no global kind of platform to come together. Again, like as previously mentioned, it's basically all the global power structures kind of in one venue, but also provides an incredible opportunity for change. And fortunately, unfortunately, every COP made progress, but not far enough. Yet without it, we would be even further behind. So while it's not enough, it's at least something. And also, these processes do not describe the highest ambition. They describe the bottom line, where we should not fall below, right? With the global stock take, with the NDCs. This is all what we minimum should do. No one tells you like the maximum what we should do, right? I mean, all countries can provide more climate finance, can do more mitigation, can do more adaptation. That's fine, right? And I think like what we are defining here is kind of like the lowest kind of common denominator, and we enable the ones who want to go further to do more. And I think that's kind of like what inspires me. So how can we kind of lift this bottom line a little bit higher so we all do more, but also how do we provide more effort for the ones who actually want to go further? And I think that's kind of the spectrum where we are, and we definitely have to overshoot with the ambition because it's always coming lower in this process.
Elise, did you want to?
Yes, well, when we were preparing, I was also reflecting back on who has been helping me in this process. And actually, most of the time, they were more senior women leaders. So the first woman who helped me to go to my first COP in Montreal was a member of the European Parliament. And then I was really inspired by Julia Martin-Lefebvre. She was Director General of IUCN. We were in Bali together. And then Ambassador Khan. She was really my mentor, top-level diplomat. She was chief negotiator for the COP presidency for Fiji, and I think these, also looking at them as role models, has really given me the hope and the strength and the willingness to continue. And now I would like to kind of pass on the baton to the next generation. So I think this is going to be my focus now, is how we prepare the next generation of youth leaders. But also to your question, I think quite a few times I thought I'm going to give up, it's too much. And I always go back to it, and I think I will never give up. There was one time Copenhagen agreement, well, there was no agreement actually, but Copenhagen COP. Everybody was waiting for the Copenhagen agreement. It was kind of like before Paris. And it failed, and we worked so hard. You know, I was part of the WWF International at the time. We had this huge delegation with different countries. And we were like totally like, you know, discouraged, and after Copenhagen, I was around 30-year-old then. I was like, I give up on COP, and I'm just going to turn to my own family. And the next month I was pregnant with my first child. And at that point I thought I'm going to give up on COP because it's not delivering and it's too much big scale. I'm just focusing on my community, my family, my village in Switzerland. But actually, the moment you give birth and you have your baby in the arms, it's like it's actually, I think this is now what really gives me the energy to continue, is also to think about the next generations. I mean, we have to work for your future, for the future of our children, for the grandchildren that will come later. And we can't give up. Like, we can't just say, okay, I'm just going to be depressed and stay in my bed and give up, because if we do that, we're not planting seeds for a more sustainable future for the next generation. So for me, this is really the thing that keeps me going, is to plant seeds of hope and positive action for you, for the next generation.
I think we had a question here. I think, yeah, there's a microphone.
I don't know if I need a microphone.
Yes, you do.
Okay, sorry.
And then you can drop it.
Okay,
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, thank you so much for all insights that you shared. I would like to ask also if you have any advice or critics towards youth, in the sense, when I try to make a self-critics about myself as well as any youth organizations, I realize that there are a lot of different voices, and it's hard to bring everyone on the same page. And I also understand that young people want to lead a move, a wave by themselves, and it's sometimes hard to bring them all together. And maybe this is one of the reasons that, again, I try to see it from the other side of the medal, from the perspective of adult negotiators, and maybe this is one of the reasons why it's hard to build the trust between youth and the others, let's say, because there's no really one common interest. I believe in democracy. I think it's very good that there are slight differences between different NGOs, organizations, and everything, which is super cool. But when it's about climate change, we don't have a lot of time to maybe hear a lot of different perspectives. I mean, I hope you see what I mean. And maybe we need to really gather, and, you know, Yango is it helps us to bring us on the same page. But still, I feel like we need more. We need to create a better guideline, or, you know, find a way to bring us to the same page. What do you think in that regard?
Well, I mean, ultimately, young people are not a homogeneous group, right? And by having like 50% of the world's population currently under the age of 35, which is considered to be in the bracket where young is working, or like considered as young or young adults or children, I mean, it's incredible, right? So many different lived realities. And I think we benefit from a diversity of views, of also like world views of different realities we are living in, because I think that also shapes the process. There is not one way on how we tackle the crisis, but actually there's a multitude of ways. For example, when we go into like agriculture, right? How are we transforming agricultural systems? There's not one way how we have to do this. There are like so many different ways. And I mean, having these different approaches on how we're, for example, transforming a food system towards a climate, a food system which is basically like mitigating efforts and not kind of like contributing even more, we have to allow this diversity to happen, right? That's one point. Yet, I mean, what you're pointing out is that young people are very often fragmented also like in their coordination and mobilization effort. I think they're Youngo, but also the Climate Action Network International and others are providing a great platform in the climate space to kind of gather us and work with us throughout the year. Because whatever is not coordinated before we're coming here is not going to be coordinated here, right? Because everyone is just like really overwhelmed. So like working throughout the year, building these like local networks, then kind of regional network, national, regional, and then global networks, thematic networks is incredibly important, but also takes a lot of time, right? And again, there, for example, we have like challenges around language and so on, or different forms of abilities and disabilities. So I think kind of connecting early enough, basically throughout the year, like kind of see a COP engagement as a kind of year-long activity, and not just like, oh, in September I'm like, trying to get, into it, and I'm going to prepare myself like a week before COP, because that's definitely always going to be too late. Definitely investing into understanding other perspectives. That's when we from the Academy, this year we trained over 300 negotiators, 150 of them are here, and we do like a lot of exercises for them to deeply understand positions of others. Because if you just come in, and I talk to you and you have a different opinion, I'm already coming in that I'm right, it's not going to work, right? So how can I deconstruct my own opinion about my own standpoint and just for a moment kind of put all of this aside and say that whatever you say is right for you to say, and then understand and wrap kind of like this gift under the, okay, like why do you come to this conclusion, why do I come to another conclusion, and where is our underlying interest? Because very often, as you rightfully mentioned, the interest is the same, but our position is different. And if we dig deeper and ask why, we actually come very often to something we would agree. But very often we're getting stuck in a position and just fight each other in a position without trying to understand. But this takes time. It takes a setting which actually allows us to go deeper, also become vulnerable, which is not going to happen here, right? You're not going to ask like a lead negotiator, like, why is your position on this that you're not going to give more climate finance? They're not going to open up and tell you like, why they agree. But you can reach out to them before the ESPYs, for example, in May. They might open up and are willing to go on an off-the-record call with you, or even meet them, for example, at the ESPYs and actually tell you why their position is different. This helps, again, you or, I mean, all of us in the room, to then actually come something forward. And I think that's the incredible power of young people, because we haven't been in the system for that long. We can actually, get out of our way to make these conversations happen, to bring bridge proposals, which no one else can do, because a negotiator has been fighting for like the last 10 years is not going to suddenly be open and vulnerable to someone else. But we can come in if we have the roles and the opportunities to do so. So I think there's an incredible kind of like cracking the shells. We just have to kind of like be courageous enough to do this and be connected enough to support each other.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I have 3 tips to share, and I'll try to be quick.
And then there are 2 questions.
One is engaging in having the courage to engage in dialogue with people who don't agree with you. That's the number 1. The number 2 is combining top-down policy and advocacy with bottom-up grassroots pressure and building this pressure cooker on both sides, with people on the inside and people on the outside. And the third one is unity. And this is actually about one family on one earth, I think, and it's a fine balance, but making diversity a strength, but also looking at all of us as a united climate movement. And the first one, I want to just give one example. Last year, we hosted an online summit between Sultan El Jaber, COP28 president and CEO of a very large oil company, and Mary Robinson during a woman-led summit. And we had to face opposition inside the women movement, because some people were saying, why do you invite Sultan El Jaber? We don't want him, like it's going to be greenwash. And we had to convince people that yes, we have to engage in a dialogue with him, even if we don't agree. And I'm glad we did it, because that moment of Sultan El Jaber and Mary Robinson together created a butterfly effect. We saw his real face. Actually, he was not so polite to Mary, and he was totally off track on the fossil fuel debate, challenging science. That was exposed by The Guardian. It was viral. We had like 12 million views of the online summit and 60 media outlets, I think, covering that. And I think that created the ingredients then to have a huge mobilization of civil society during COP28. And it's also by exposing the reality of this dialogue that we can create change. So having the courage to engage with people who don't agree with us. We all do the same mistake of spending a lot of time within our youth group or within our women group or our trade union group, like deciding, okay, what do we put in the press release, that word, these words, and we don't spend enough time engaging on the outside with people who don't agree and having the courage to engage in that dialogue. And yes, the bottom up and the top down, the combining the pressure. I think the Swiss Youth for Climate, you've done it really well. You have people on the inside of the Swiss delegation, working on gender, you have a very strong ally on the inside, and you also do the pressure on the outside with the fossil fuel of the day and the media pressure. And that's when you combine these two things that you can have impact. And the last thing about unity, I know it's hard, but we have to work together, and sometimes also we have to respect people who are older. Now there's also this thing that, if you're not young and from Africa and a woman, that I know that actually there are men who also feel excluded now. There's a bit of a backlash. And I think we need to make space for everybody. And before we close, I just wanted to ask you here in the room, actually, just everybody, I want to ask you, if you are a man, can you stand up, see who you are? Great. And the woman, if you can stand up now. The people who are below 25? Below 25? And people above 50? Anybody here above 50? Yeah, great. So I want to applaud you because you came to a youth event, and you see we have to reproduce. And really, I mean, if we want to win this fight against climate change, we need everybody. We need to make sure everybody has a voice and everybody is part of the solution. So yeah, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. I'm going to ask my lovely, lovely speakers to be very brief on these last 2 questions. I think there were 2 at the back. It better be a good question. It better be a good question now.
So I'm based in Brussels, and I follow European climate policy, of course. I think every EU politician, every member of European Parliament recognizes that it was the youth mobilization in 2019, Fridays for Future, the school strikes, that made it possible to pass the European Green Deal. I mean, they all give the youth credit for that. But since then, in the last couple of years, we've seen, at least in Belgium, I don't know how it is in Switzerland, but a really huge drop in participation in marches and rallies. And so I think it's wonderful, of course, that youth are now at the negotiating table. But without that mobilization behind you, aren't you at risk of sort of losing your power of advocacy and even your legitimacy in the eyes of the older negotiators that you're have in front of you?
Maybe you should answer that.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that. Yeah, I always think it's, and I'm, just chip in if I say something outrageous, but I feel like, activism is a bit of an ecosystem, the way I see it, and as we were saying about unity and reaching out, I think you need both people in the room and the people putting the pressure outside. In my spare time, I go and film my friends get arrested, and talking to them, especially protesting a lot of the legislation going on in the UK. It's a completely different approach, and it's a huge personal sacrifice that the kids in suits might experience differently. And it's been
super interesting for me to see both perspectives, and it's true that I think there was a drop-off in participation. I think probably COVID and a bunch of kids going online for school and for life probably didn't help that. And yeah, I think there is a need to reinvigorate some of those activist grassroots organizations in order to keep the pressure up, and especially to build momentum. And I do think that if there's no one screaming outside the room, then you lose legitimacy. And so yeah, I think it's crucial to any progress is to have a kind of mouvement populaire behind it to support it. And it's important that the people who are at negotiation tables ground their opinions in those movements as well. In the media, as Swiss Youth for Climate, we're often asked, you're the well-behaved kids, you're doing really well, looking really neat and taking nice pictures. And people try and strike divide between the different movements, but they're actually part of the same effort, and they need to happen at the same time, in my opinion.
I fully agree. But just to say, I think there are also phases, and I think sometimes, it's kind of a pressure point from a pressure kind of group outside. Then it's kind of like something in the parliament, then it's within kind of like companies or whatever. And I think it's kind of like the ecosystem, because also it's extremely exhausting just from a very human level to kind of organizing strikes and strikes and strikes. I've been doing this, and at one point you just also humanly cannot do any longer. So also kind of like how can the ecosystem support each other? And I think it goes back to some of the question what we talked before. So how can we strengthen this mycelium of connection? How can we ourselves be a mycelium of connections ourselves? So how can we contribute to many different things? And I know that probably all of you in the room are this already, right? But also how can we invite more people who are part of different groups? So like, for example, being a parliamentarian, also being an educator who is also, for example, taking part in climate protests, or kind of someone who is writing and also then, for example, contributing to capacity building others. So how can we ourselves really strengthen this ecosystem so no one can actually divide us, because we are just so interlinked? I think that's the solution to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think we'll take the last question. Do you want to know as well? There's one behind, and then we'll wrap up.
Yes. Before being kicked out of the room?
Before getting kicked out violently.
Hi, thank you for your amazing insights, and I might have missed the part to which I'm going to ask probably. But according to you, I wanted to know how women's perspective on such, global events or, global issues are different from men, and how, what's the difference basically, yeah?
Well, maybe many different perspectives. We have young negotiators who have young kids and babies at home. And we also have actually young fathers, young single fathers also have kids at home, so not to single out any of them. But I mean, this is a complete different reality. I will be going to Riyadh for the conference on desertification. I just had a call last night from a mom whose baby is sick and she had to cancel her participation to be a young negotiator, the first young negotiator for Iraq, right? I mean, this is an incredible opportunity for a young female from Iraq to participate, and now her baby is sick, no one can take care of it, and she needs to stay home. I mean, this is a very clear example here. I think also going back to what I mentioned before, that especially young females and females of all age, kind of who go out of their way to be co-chairs, lead negotiators, and so on, who face a huge kind of risk of discrimination, gender-based discrimination, by being outspoken, being out there, and of course, then also face a lot of harsh comments. That's also why there's a new process and a new code of conduct in the space itself. We can also support each other. Probably many of us have been already experiencing also sexual violence and harassment in these spaces of how we have been behaving. So I think there's a lot of things out there, and I think what is important that we surface it. So we have actually a working group, for example, now within the UNCCD to combat desertification around women negotiators who are supporting each other, who have been facing sexual harassment in the last proceedings, to kind of just how do we deal with it, and how can we as an ecosystem support each other. So there's definitely a lot out there, and just maybe to finish with the last comment, someone was mentioning she's a co-chair of one of the meetings, and she has I'm on my period, I just can't do this anymore because I'm just so drained. And where she was basically exposing the system is also built by people who have the same hormonal level throughout the year, and don't go within 2 weeks to a crazy hormonal cycle where sometimes you just want to hibernate in bed and not go out. I'm just saying there's so much for us to unpack, so your question probably requires a whole other event, but would love to catch up on you with this.
Elise, would you like the last word?
Yes, I think this is very interesting, your question, because I've been in the climate space for 20 years, but it's only in the last 3 years that I started to connect gender and climate change. And I think this is also part of my experience working for Ambassador Khan as part of the COP presidency. And I saw her stepping into the power of feminine leadership. So building empathy, building trust with all the parties through the Talanoa dialogue at the time. And it was really powerful, and they managed to get a really good outcome at COP. But then after COP, she was basically fired by the Prime Minister of Fiji. And it broke my heart. And I saw the patriarchy there and the injustice. And then I had my own experience in politics in my city, Nyon, where there is this, it's very patriarchal actually. We have a mayor in my town who is, not so respectful with women in politics. And I saw also women in politics in Switzerland that sometimes to stay there, because it's only 20-25% of women at the government, they become almost harder than men. So I think what is interesting to explore is also how all of us, men and women, we have a feminine energy and a masculine energy, and it's also how we balance the yin and the yang. And now I must say what I find interesting is not just women talking to women about women, it's also having men with us, and that's why I really like the International Gender Champions initiative in Geneva, because we have people like Antonio Guterres who are international gender champions. So we have actually men stepping up and saying, we want gender balance, we want to unlock the power of 100% of the potential of society, not 50%, but on both sides. I've also seen actually just women between themselves can be also very tricky. And I think we need both. We need men and women together, where you can see this in many places, actually also in sports, in politics, in companies. When you have men and women together, we deliver better results. So that's why inclusion and diversity is really, really important.
Thank you. And with
and
that,
I have to go very soon.
Yeah, with that, thank you very much for coming. A round of applause for our speakers.